What? Your mom? An accident?
I know you probably don't know Susan, because it's been years since you last saw her, but she's always been bad with people. So I've got to help her out with things at the hospital.
My hand gripping the phone was sweaty. The call had come while I was in the middle of a local volunteer cleanup event. It was my husband, John, telling me that his mom, Emily, had been hospitalized. But there was something off about that. Right in front of me was Emily herself, holding a large trash bag and directing the other volunteers at the collection point. Does John not know that I've been hiking with his mom and doing these volunteer activities with her? I mean, we've even had dinner together a few times and talked about the things we did that day. Oh, I see now. Come to think of it, every time we ate together, he was always glued to his phone. It just looked like he was listening. My words never reached him at all. John had declared that he wouldn't be coming home for at least a week, using his mom's care as an excuse.
She really hates relying on others, you know.
That's how he ended the call. I explained the situation to Emily, who gave me a puzzled look from right in front of me. John had basically just told a blatant lie to get away from home. This was pretty much as bad as it gets. Emily didn't lose her bright smile in front of the other volunteers, but she threw the swollen trash bag into the truck with a little more force than necessary.
Throw it out. Get rid of it. Clean as a whistle, right?
My name is Susan. I consider myself a pretty ordinary person, but for some reason, people seem to find it surprising that I have a hobby like hiking. I guess it's because I'm shorter than the average woman. Being short has always been a bit of a complex for me, so I drank a lot of milk, but it didn't do much, and here I am. I also have pale skin and a delicate frame, so maybe I don't seem like the type who enjoys hiking. When I was 29, hiking became a weekend and holiday routine for me during my breaks from work. I joined a hiking club where I met John, another guy who loved the mountains. He was my age, bright and kind-hearted.
Such great weather, perfect day for hiking.
Yeah, it really is. Wiping sweat from his brow, John smiled at me. He was just as into hiking as I was, and we quickly hit it off. We started spending time together outside of hiking, doing things like eating out or shopping. While we still joined the hiking club, more often than not, it was just the two of us heading out on hikes. We shared the beauty of nature and overcame difficult trails together.
This view is amazing. Look, Susan.
Together, we conquered many mountains. The views from the sunny summits were a privilege granted only to those who had endured the tough climb to get there. When we were with the hiking club, the schedule didn't always account for the weather, so we sometimes had to hike in less than ideal conditions. But when it was just John and me, we always checked the weather forecast and made sure the skies were clear before setting out. That's why the views we saw from the top were always spectacular. Reaching the summit, surrounded by a breathtaking landscape. Below us, a sea of lush green mountains and a peaceful river winding through them. The view's incredible. It's the best.
I'd be so happy if I could keep seeing these views with you, Susan.
With a carefree smile, John said such things without a hint of embarrassment. Through hiking, our bond deepened, and eventually we became a couple. Not long after we started dating, he asked to meet my parents, but I gently declined with a smile. I had lost both of my parents when I was young. I'd lived with my grandparents until I was 22, then moved out on my own. After graduating college and starting work, I got so busy that I hadn't been able to visit my grandparents much since then. Before I could repay my grandparents for all they did, they both passed away, one after the other. I regretted so deeply not spending more time with the two people I loved so much. Now I live alone, still working in elderly care. Until I met John, I was living in loneliness. The reason I took up hiking as a hobby was because while climbing, I could forget all the unpleasant and painful things. But now, I sometimes surprise myself with just how fulfilling it is to have someone I love by my side. A few years into our relationship, John proposed to me. He mentioned that his mom, Emily, lived alone and that they were considering living together in the future. John explained that his mom was considered a bit unusual by those around her. Unusual? What kind of person must she be to have her own son say she's unusual? On the day we went to visit Emily's home to introduce ourselves, I found myself thinking about what unusual might mean. Sitting in the passenger seat as John drove us to her house, I felt a bit nervous. Sensing my anxiety, John smiled gently at me.
My mom. She's a bit difficult. You don't have to force yourself to get along with her. Every girlfriend I've introduced to her before. It didn't end well.
Really? Hearing that only made me more nervous. The house we arrived at was an old wooden one-story, and it looked like it had been standing for a long time. It reminded me a bit of the house where I had lived with my grandparents, and standing at the front door gave me a strange sense of comfort. I rang the doorbell. I heard footsteps down the hallway, and then the door opened.
Welcome, Susan, right? John, show her inside.
I had to look up to meet the gaze of Emily, who was quite tall. I gave her a polite nod. After some simple greetings, we were shown to the living room where a feast had been prepared, and I was delighted to feel so welcomed. Well, Emily, it's nice to officially meet you. John and I are getting married, so I'm here today to say hello and introduce myself. Sensing my nervousness, Emily gave a gentle, wry smile. Her expression was kind. I couldn't understand why John had described her as unusual. Emily stared at me for a moment, then smiled after thinking it over.
Congratulations, Susan. John can be a bit clumsy, but I hope you have a happy wedding life.
Thank you. I let out a sigh of relief. It felt like a weight had been lifted off my chest, knowing I had Emily's understanding and blessing. After that, we enjoyed the meal she had prepared, chatting casually about how delicious it was. Our conversation flowed even more smoothly as we drank tea, and Emily shared stories about John's childhood. When John suddenly brought up the idea of living together in the future, Emily's expression turned a little more serious, and she asked me a question.
If John and I were both hanging off a cliff, which one of us would you save?
What? Even though we hadn't talked for long, I found myself liking Emily. Maybe it wasn't for any specific reason. It might just be that our personalities clicked. I pretended to think for a moment, stroking my chin with my hand. Well, I think I'd save you, Emily. John's strong, so I'm sure he'd be able to figure out a way to save himself no matter the situation. John laughed. Hey, make sure to save me too, he joked. Emily laughed as well and smiled. You're strong and kind.
About living together, though, I'm going to keep living on my own. I don't want to rely on anyone, but I'm grateful for how you and John feel.
The way Emily refused to live with us didn't feel cold or distant. To me, it felt like she was being considerate of John and me. But John didn't seem to take it that way. He grumbled on the drive home, upset that she had turned down the idea of living together.
Well, Mom's an unusual person, so you don't need to worry about her. As long as we're happy, that's what matters to me.
That's what John said, but I found that I really liked Emily. The nostalgic feeling of that house reminds me of my grandparents. By the time 2 years had passed since John and I got married, we had stopped hiking together. Now, I'm the only one still attending the hiking club. John started coming home late, using work as the reason, and business trips or working on weekends became more frequent.
Sorry, I'm too tired from work to go hiking.
That's how John would turn down my invitations, but sometimes he'd go out without telling me where he was going. It even felt like he was meeting someone late into the night when I was out hiking. I pretended not to notice the sweet scent left on John's clothes. On weekdays, he works hard and gives me his paycheck. He smiles and says, "It's delicious," when he eats the dinner I made. When I think of those good things about him, I couldn't bring myself to face the faint shadow of another woman I felt lurking around. But gradually, John and I talked less and less, and the days passed by with us just missing each other. It was during this time that I started to grow closer to Emily. It all began with something small. Since John kept turning down my hiking invites, I decided to ask Emily instead. At first, Emily hesitated, saying, "I've never been hiking before." But since she was already quite fit, she quickly grew to love it. We started with low mountains and gradually worked our way up to higher peaks. It was during one of those hikes that I learned Emily was the head of a volunteer organization. Since she had come hiking with me, I decided to join her volunteer activities, and we began seeing each other more often. Participating in volunteer work gave me a sense of fulfillment, and I admired how energetic Emily was in her efforts. She's so cool, I thought. Regardless of age or gender, Emily was brilliant at interacting with a wide range of people. One day, we were having a meal together. We stopped by an old-fashioned cafe that a local had recommended to us during a volunteer event. The scent of the old wooden building put me at ease. Recently, I feel like things with John have changed a bit. I know he's busy with work, but we don't go hiking anymore, and we talk less and less. By this point, Emily and I had grown comfortable with each other after all the hiking and volunteer activities we had done together. We were now at the point where I could chat with her while eating fresh pasta at a cafe, savoring the sauce in my mouth.
I see. I know John's busy with work, but it must feel lonely not being able to hike together anymore.
At first, I understood when he said he was busy with work, but lately, I've started sensing the presence of another woman. I was just casually venting about my husband, but Emily, who had been listening with a calm expression, suddenly leaned forward.
What? Really?
"It's not like I have any proof or anything," I replied, twirling my pasta around my fork.
I'm sorry. It's embarrassing, but I've heard stories about John being a bit of a flirt, even in the past.
I tried to act like it didn't bother me, but I was shaken. "So he's been like this for a long time. I have this feeling that a habit of cheating never really goes away. So what should I do?"
Susan, you have to take care of yourself. No matter what John does, your happiness is the most important thing.
There was a strange power in Emily's words. I felt like her words were saving me.
If John really is cheating, I'll give him a good smack.
Emily said this with a serious face, and I couldn't help but laugh. I had the feeling she would actually do it if it came to that. As time passed, my relationship with Emily deepened, while my interactions with John dwindled to the short moments we saw each other in the mornings. One morning, as part of a volunteer event, I was cleaning the neighborhood park with Emily. The fresh morning breeze made me feel pleasantly tired. Working hard to keep the park beautiful was fulfilling and genuinely enjoyable. Then, without warning, my phone rang. Startled by the ringtone, I pulled my phone from the bag slung over my shoulder and glanced at the screen. It was a call from John. "Hello," I answered, and an anxious voice rang out from the other end.
Susan, this is bad. I just got a call from the hospital. Mom's been in an accident. I'm heading back home for a while, so I won't be around for a week.
"What? Your mom? An accident?"
You probably don't know since it's been years since you've seen her, but she's always had a hard time getting along with people, so I need to handle everything at the hospital myself.
I went silent, processing the meaning behind John's words. Who was this woman in front of me, giving clear instructions to the volunteers while holding a big trash bag? Does John not know that I've been hiking with Emily and doing volunteer work together? We've even had dinner together a few times and talked about what we did that day. Oh, right. Now that I think about it, he was always on his phone during meals. It only looked like he was listening. My words never actually reached him. John declared that he wouldn't be home for at least a week because he needed to take care of his mom.
She hates depending on others, you know.
That's how he ended the call. Afterward, I explained the situation to Emily, who gave me a puzzled look. John was using an obvious lie as an excuse to stay out. This was pretty much as bad as it gets. Emily didn't let her friendly smile falter in front of the other volunteers, but she threw the swollen trash bag into the truck with a little more force than necessary.
Throw it out. Get rid of it. Clean as a whistle, right?
She clapped her hands together, smiling at me. I smiled back in sync with her. The following week, John came home after being away for 7 days. As soon as he opened the door, he let out an overly dramatic sigh and muttered, "Man, I'm beat," in the empty entryway. He stepped into the living room and smiled when he saw me in the kitchen. The room was warmly lit by sunlight streaming through the window. In one corner, there was a chic sofa, and on the low table sat a single vase with a white lisianthus. On the wall hung a photo of John and me smiling together, a memory frozen in time. John's smile froze when he noticed Emily sitting on the sofa, casually reading a paperback. The white lisianthus in the single vase swayed gently in the breeze from the air conditioner.
Mom.
I've been hiking and doing volunteer work with Emily for years. By the way, which mom of yours was in an accident again? John was speechless, standing there frozen. Emily calmly turned a page in her book, completely unbothered. John couldn't hide his confusion at the contradictory situation. John's confusion was palpable as he looked between the two of us, unable to say a word. I walked over to John, doing my best to appear concerned, and quietly asked him one more time, "Who was the mom that got into an accident?"
Well, that's.
Right. You can't say, can you? In that case, let's have someone else explain. I pulled out my phone to make a call. Emily remained quietly focused on her book. John stood there, clearly unsure of what was about to happen, his anxiety growing. Emily, noticing John's panic, spoke up. "Sit down."
You're a man, aren't you? Face it like one.
Mom, you've been seeing Susan. What is this? Who are you calling?
Stand tall. Take responsibility for what you've done. And as for whatever Susan decides to do, well, even I don't know that.
With that, Emily harshly dismissed him and returned her attention to her book. John was flustered, struggling to form coherent thoughts. A few moments later, the doorbell rang, and Emily went to answer for me. A young woman appeared before us, and John's face turned pale. Her name is Sarah. What I knew was that she was John's junior at work, and Sarah was the woman he was having an affair with. By the time I called her, she must have realized everything. She stood with her hands clasped in front of her chest, trembling slightly and looking down. Emily was well connected through her volunteer work, even with people at John's office. It didn't take long for her to discover that John was involved with a suspicious woman at work. Getting Sarah's contact information wasn't hard for Emily either. Emily gave me Sarah's number, and I introduced myself as John's wife and asked her to come to the house. At first, Sarah pretended to be oblivious over the phone, saying, "I don't know what you're talking about." But then I sent her a picture of the two of them at the station. It was taken by one of Emily's friends. Today, Emily and I had planned everything to corner John and Sarah at this time and place. There was no way they could talk their way out of it. Sarah, still trembling slightly, started to cry, looking down. John put his arm around her shoulders and said, "It's okay. I'm sorry." Okay? Sorry to who, exactly? If someone who didn't know the situation saw this moment, they might think Emily and I were the bad guys. A whirlwind of emotions swirled inside me. Anger, sadness, and betrayal clashed within me, and I clenched my fists tightly.
I really am sorry. I feel so terrible for you. It's all my fault.
No, it's me. It's my fault. I gave in to my own desires. It's all on me.
I felt like my vision was fading, as if I were watching a scene from a movie. This surreal sight unfolded before me, and it felt strangely distant, like it wasn't really happening to me. What had I been hoping for from these two? Did I want them to apologize? I don't even know. I didn't know what words would soothe my wounded heart, and all I felt was the uncomfortable weight of my emotions.
Don't try to make this some kind of touching story. What you both did was just plain awful.
Emily slammed her paper back onto the table. Sarah flinched, her shoulders trembling.
The one who's the victim here is Susan. The only one who has the right to cry right now is her. Nobody asked for your tears.
Mom, don't blame Sarah. It's my fault. She was struggling because she didn't have a boyfriend, and I took advantage of that.
How far are you going to go with this, John? You know that girl. She's married.
John's face twisted in confusion. I had suspected something was off, and it turned out I was right. John hadn't known that Sarah was married. Apparently, she'd kept using her maiden name at work and didn't talk much about her family. There were rumors at work that she was involved with other men besides John, and honestly, she's just a terrible person. Suddenly, John seemed to lose trust in Sarah and quietly distanced himself from her. He looked at me. There was a flicker of fear in his eyes. The sparkle that once shone as we gazed at the priceless views from the mountain peaks together was gone, lost forever. John, we don't have kids yet, but I always believed we had a bond as a family. Did you ever think about how much it would hurt me if you cheated?
I'm sorry. I regret what I've done. I feel so ashamed of myself.
That's not an answer to my question. Did you ever think about how much I'd be hurt? John struggled for words, desperately trying to come up with an answer. In the corner of the room, Sarah stared blankly at the floor.
I'm sorry.
That was all John could say. If he had deeply apologized and cried in front of me, would I have forgiven him? The man I once loved is gone. The man I enjoyed being with is no longer here. The man who supported me on our hikes up the mountains is gone. Why? In the end, I'm all alone, aren't I? The words slipped out before I could stop them. I hadn't meant to say them. Having lost my parents as a child and my grandparents after that, without John, I had no one left. There was never anyone I could tell how lonely I was. That's why I had wanted someone like that in my life. Why? Why did it have to turn out like this? Why? Tears welled up and overflowed. I didn't want this. I couldn't stop them. I could see John standing there helplessly, but his figure was blurry through my tears. I bit my lip, trying desperately to hold back the flood of emotions. Don't cry. Don't cry, I told myself. I was going to ask John for a divorce. Then I'd be on my own. I'd have to bury these feelings of loneliness and sadness deep inside, because I'd have to survive on my own. Even if I cried, no one would pity me. Emily turned to John and said, I disown you. Don't ever show your face to me again. Then she embraced me hard. She held me so tightly, so incredibly tightly.
You've always been strong and kind, but it's enough now. You've endured so much. You can cry as much as you need. I'll be here for you.
At her words, the dam holding back my tears burst. Being held by tall Emily meant my face was pressed against her chest. For some reason, it reminded me of a mother I hadn't felt since childhood. I cried and cried, for a long time.
You know, I used to feel a bit self-conscious about being so tall, but now I think it's okay.
I quickly realized she was saying that to comfort me as I continued to cry. I had always felt insecure about my own height, too. But right now, in this moment of being held at just the right height, it felt like my insecurity was somehow okay. Her embrace was so warm that I wished my tears would never stop. Eventually, John and I divorced. John quit his job and now juggles multiple part-time jobs to pay alimony to both me and Sarah's husband. He's probably working too hard to have any time to play around anymore. One day, I brought a box of brownies I bought at the local bakery to Emily's houses. Though we were no longer in-laws, our relationship had transformed into a friendship where we enjoyed each other's company. But deep down, I looked up to Emily like a real mother. I could never bring myself to say that out loud because it was too embarrassing. Even after the divorce, Emily continued to invite me to her house as naturally as ever. We'd sit together, watching random TV shows, having meals, sometimes even going hiking. We'd do volunteer work together, chatting about how we hoped for nice weather tomorrow. Would you consider living with me? I asked, summoning all my courage. I had already given up the house I used to share with John and was living alone in an apartment. There were many moments when I felt lonely. On days off, I often found myself spending most of my time at Emily's house. I remembered that before I got married, Emily had refused to live together, but now, I needed her. And one day, if Emily ever needed someone, I wanted to be there for her.
Living together might cause trouble for you. That's why I don't want to.
I want to be with you, Emily. I want to live together. Emily, looking a little troubled in a way I hadn't seen before, hesitated for a moment, then asked me the same question she had asked years ago. It was the one about who I would save if she and John were both hanging off a cliff. Before answering, I smiled and showed her my teeth. I wouldn't save either of you. You're still strong and healthy, Emily. Emily burst out laughing at my answer. Not long after, we started living together. People mistook us for a happy mother and daughter, and we didn't mind that at all.